Hello, thank you for watching my video, which has unique content, in particular relating to the methodical system I believe that I have uncovered that Ian Brady used to plan the timings and, more crucially, the burial locations of the 5 children he murdered with Myra Hindley. If correct, then knowledge of this system, put together with other information already out there, could be used to locate Keith Bennett, whose body has never been found. Between July 1963 and October 1965, Brady and Hindley were responsible for the notorious series of sadistic child killings that became known as the Moors murders. I'm going to discuss Brady's system and the evidence behind this. I'll show my photograph of what I believe is the exact location where Brady and Hindley murdered Keith Bennett on Shiny Brook, which precisely corresponds to one of Brady's photographs that is not in the public domain. I'll discuss where I believe the evidence points to Keith Bennett being buried that is close to where he was murdered. I'll give a new interpretation of the disposal plan that Brady drew up for Edward Evans, which has significant relevance to the burial site of Keith Bennett via childhood neighbours of Brady and Hindley, Carol and David Waterhouse. I'll also detail how it can be clearly seen that many of the photographs that Brady took with the graves in mind, he also took to refer to his murder system in his neat, geographically aligned way. Given this knowledge, these photographs can now be used against him to determine exactly where he buried Keith Bennett, and I'll show how. As well as all of this, I want to discuss the controversial subject of a code that Brady may have used in the book he wrote on serial killing, The Gates of Janus. If correct, this code gives precise geographical references to Keith Bennett's murder. Brady also appears to have used the same code to baffle the police during the reinvestigation of the murders in the mid-1980s. It's quite straightforward and not as far-fetched as it sounds. The reason for my studying all of this to such a degree is Keith Bennett. 12-year-old Keith Bennett was the 3rd child they murdered on Tuesday the 16th of June 1964. It's believed that Brady and Hindley buried him on Saddleworth, or more accurately Wessenden Hebmore, in the Peak District in northern England near Manchester. Keith is the only child whose body has not yet been found. Once I'd figured out Brady's system, as it was so precise, I wondered if it could be used to find Keith's remains. I strongly believe that it can, and will set out why this is the case. I consider that the evidence from the Moors murders literature points to Keith being buried at a particular location. The clincher is that this location intersects with Brady's system, so they come together at exactly the same spot. Of course, I don't want to upset Keith's family with any of this, but felt I couldn't just sit on what I'd found out. The reason for putting this video together is that I sincerely hope that someone will see it who has the authority and expertise to initiate a search of what I believe is a very defined area where Keith is located. This flowchart may look complicated, but what it really demonstrates is that there are many different pieces of evidence that lead to Keith Bennett's burial site. Putting all these together really strengthens the case for one particular location. Brady always said that he had a hidden agenda, and I believe that what I'm going to detail is it. Brady used and admitted to using a system, but of course never gave its details. He also said his aim wasn't just to carry out the perfect murder. My theory is that he actually wanted to devise and use the perfect murder system. There is some evidence that he didn't even tell Hindley the basis behind it. Brady wrote a book on the analysis of serial killing called The Gates of Janus. This was published in 2001 and updated in 2015, 2 years before he died. Another key text I will mention now is the biography of Brady written by Dr. Alan Keatley. They closely corresponded for 25 years. It was published in 2017 after Brady's death, and importantly, much of the biography is actually in Brady's own words. In his own book, Brady wrote that there was more to his actions than just the killing. He said he believed the term serial killer to be highly misleading, as it implicitly suggests that murder is the paramount objective or motivating urge in the mind of the killer, whereas in his case, if he can be believed, effectively the murders themselves were secondary. Brady went on to say, and I believe this is crucial in understanding what he did, that he had commitment to a personal system. He wrote of a rhythm to the killings. He used chess analogies with the murders and burial locations. He even wrote of the human chessboard. It is clear he viewed the children as pawns in his game, and the regular chessboard with everything lined up within its straight lines had what he called elevated aestheticism. From my analysis of the Moors murders literature, the evidence points to Brady having used a system based on the summer and winter solstices and the solar alignment at these times to plan the murder and burial timings and locations. I have called this the Solstice Line system. The table lists the children they murdered, the dates they were murdered and their bodies discovered, and the order in which their bodies were discovered. If we start with the timings, Brady timed the murders to roughly coincide with the summer and winter solstices. He knew not to make the timings exact, as this would have made it too obvious to the police, who could have preempted the next murder to apprehend them. Edward Evans was the exception, as he was murdered in early October 1965. To prove to David Smith that Brady was a killer, Brady said the murder was 3 months too early and would not count because of this. I believe he said this as it did not fit his solstice system. Detective Chief Superintendent Peter Topping led the re-investigation into the disappearances of Pauline Reed and Keith Bennett in the mid-1980s. On Brady's first visit to Saddleworth Moor with DCS Topping in 1987, Brady likened the Greystones rock formation that overlooks Shiny Brook to Stonehenge. This is a comparison that Duncan's staff repeated in his book The Lost Boy, following correspondence with Hindley. I do not think it was just an off-the-cuff comment by Brady, but he dangled it as a "I know but you don't know" piece of information in front of DCS Topping for his own gratification. To compare Greystones and Stonehenge, the top 3 photographs show the real Stonehenge, the rest are of Greystones, and the bottom right image shows its adjacent stone circle. So Greystones does not consist of vertical stones supporting a lintel across them, but the main rocks are around 7 feet high and quite impressive. There's an important gap between them, which is in line with the solstitial sun, just like at Stonehenge, and I believe this is fundamental as to why Brady made the comparison between them, as we shall see. As with a lot of things for Brady, it was the symbolism that was important. If we now consider how Brady might have come across Greystones, he frequently used to walk in this area of the moor with Hindley, as it was one of their favourite spots. They would park up at the Hoe Grain lay-by on the A635, then walk down the Hoe Grain Valley that follows the stream, down to the junction with another stream, Shiny Brook, that runs parallel to the road. The photograph shows the view they would have had from Hoe Grain just before they got to the T-junction with Shiny Brook, where they would turn right to get to the sheep pen area. Greystones is directly in front of them on the side of the hill, and quite a noticeable feature. Brady had what he called a pantheistic fascination for rocks and would no doubt have been drawn to it. We know the burial sites were not random, spur-of-the-moment locations. Hindley told her prison therapist Joe Chapman that Brady planned the burial sites meticulously. She said his attention to detail was such that major landmarks on the horizon, viewed from a particular vantage point on the roads across the moors, provided a perfect grid reference for his trained mind. He had spent months planning the murders and plotting each location. Why would Brady take so long planning the precise location for each burial if there wasn't another factor involved, such as him trying to line them up with each other and gravestones? The three graves at Hollinbrown Knoll are 64, 80 and 137 metres from the road, so very close and not involving hours of trekking, and at that time there were 3 laybys to park at right there. If Brady simply wanted to plan the potential burial site of each murder to ensure they were out of sight of the road, peaty enough for a grave to be quickly dug and paced out from the lay-by in line with a feature on the horizon so he could revisit the grave in the future, it would have taken one short trip each time to do so, not months of planning. He had to ensure that the graves were precisely lined up on the Solstice Line, and that would take a lot longer. We very accurately know the burial sites of John Kilbride and Leslie Ann Downey, who were the second and fourth children to be murdered. Their graves were plotted on a map used in the 1966 trial, and this was reproduced in Jonathan Goodman's book, The Moors Murders. I added these onto a map on Google Earth that is shown. I took the burial site of Pauline Reed, their first victim, from a map shown in Duncan Staff's documentary that was released last year, The Moors Murders: A Search for Justice. This also corresponds to the position shown in the distant photograph of the site being excavated in 1987. I added this onto my Google Earth map. Even if there are inaccuracies in my transferring the grave positions onto the map and the positions are not exactly as plotted, considering that Brady planned these locations before the advent of GPS, they form a remarkably straight line. Taking a wider view, the line they form continues over to Greystones, Brady's Stonehenge. I wonder if this is the serial killer's wide-angle view of the metaphysical chessboard that Brady writes of in the Gates of Janus. A best-fit line drawn through these 3 graves when continued in a northeasterly direction intersects with Greystones. I have called this the Solstice Line. It has a bearing of approximately 242 and 62 degrees on a compass. The Stonehenge solstice solar alignment in Wiltshire is also on a northeast to southwest bearing, the same as that from Greystones to the 3 Hollinbrown Knoll burial sites. So, we have Brady likening Greystones to Stonehenge. Hindley admitted he meticulously plotted the exact burial sites. The graves of the other 3 children form a more or less straight line that, when extended, intersects with Greystones on the summer and winter solstitial sun alignment, the same as at Stonehenge. Brady frequently referred to the aesthetics of the lining up of topography and the sun in his writing, as well as time and place in relation to the murders. He gave oblique reference to the Solstice Line system over the years in this way as his hidden agenda. We know that in other aspects of his life, Brady was quite methodical. He studied bookkeeping and accountancy while in Borstal, and this helped him get a job in stockkeeping at Millwoods in Gorton, where, fatefully, he met Hindley. The disposal plan Brady drew up for Edward Evans was effectively a hand-drawn spreadsheet. So he was able to use logical, precise elements in his mind that I'm sure helped him plan the murders and plot the burials along the Solstice Line. In his own book on serial killing, The Gates of Janus, and in his biography written by Alan Keatley, Brady is quoted and writes about specific beliefs repeatedly as they were so important to him. They clearly link with the Solstice Line system and why he developed it as his template for murder. His key beliefs were atavism, that relates to ancient and primeval feelings and actions, pantheism, a deep connection with the landscape, and especially for Brady with stone and rock, and moral relativism, meaning society's morals are just artificial constructs and mean nothing, so effectively he can do what he wants. He also held symbolism, ritualistic fantasy and aesthetics as fundamental. He was not a pagan in the group ritualistic sense, but he frequently made reference to pagan values. He was strongly anti-religion. Now, if we turn to how Brady interacted with people and responded to questioning, this is important as it is fundamental in weighing up the things he did, wrote and said. He had both extreme narcissistic and antisocial personality disorders. This actually helps us interpret his words and actions as they were quite predictable, as they followed rigid patterns within the bounds of these conditions. Brady and Hindley enjoyed using codes, riddles, double and hidden meanings in their correspondence. His mantra was, "Tell a small truth to hide a greater lie." He advised reading between the lines rather than taking text literally. Brady was not one for a direct answer. Instead, he gave oblique replies with deduction needed to determine his exact reference or meaning. Now, another key piece of evidence. As previously mentioned, Brady wrote a book on serial killing called The Gates of Janus that was published in 2001 and updated in 2015, 2 years before his death. Quite naturally, many people find him publishing such a book repugnant, but if you can hold your nose and read it, Brady has filled it full of reference to the Moors murders in his usual coded, hidden meaning, reading between the lines way. Given his intractable, extreme, narcissistic personality disorder, he could not resist doing this, as he loved proving he was more clever than everyone else. He needed to be in control, feeding off his surreptitious, "I know, but you don't know, and you don't know that I'm doing this to you" actions. Brady told Alan Keatley he chose the title The Gates of Janus partly due to its symbolic allusion without specifying what this was. However, from research, what I now know is Janus was the Roman god of the solstices. This fits in with recurring themes with Brady of atavism, i.e. ancient and primeval beliefs, and paganism, and also with his Solstice Line system and where he buried Keith Bennett. It is classic Brady, a hidden meaning in the title of his book, with him gaining gratification that he is dangling his Solstice Line system and where he buried Keith Bennett right in front of everybody without them realising it until now. As shown in the photograph, the main Greystones rocks have a gap between them that is in line with the solstitial sun, and it resembles a gateway. Bearing all of this in mind and knowing that when Brady killed and buried Keith Bennett just before the summer solstice of 1964, with the setting sun at the time appearing similar to how it is pictured in my photograph, it is hard not to see the symbolism and aesthetics of this that was so important to Brady, especially given that if we take a line through the gate in these rocks, continue it over the moor for 2 miles to Hollinbrown Knoll, it passes through all 3 of the other burial sites along this solstitial northeast to southwest axis, the same axis as at Stonehenge. There are too many coincidences here, or as Brady liked to call them, crisscrosses. Another little literary snippet here. Brady, a keen reader, quotes 3 lines from W.H. Auden's poem The Two in The Gates of Janus. "The sky is darkening like a stain. Something is going to fall like rain, and it won't be flowers." As he has done with other quotations where the actual words of the quotation are not as important as what is written elsewhere in the work, I wonder whether Brady has added this in his book as a hidden reference to his methodology. As he advises in the Gates of Janus, answers will come obliquely. Looking wider than his quote, the first stanza of the poem accurately summarises the Moor's murders. You are the town and we are the clock. We are the guardians of the gate in the rock, the two. On your left and on your right, in the day and in the night, we are watching you. It does not take much literary allusion to see that Brady and Hindley are the guardians of the gate in the rock, the Gate of Janus. There are references to positioning with left and right, the time of day, light and dark. These are all very important to Brady and relevant to the methodology of the killings, time and location. Brady placed his quote from the poem in a section of the Gates of Janus where he points out to readers the hypocrisy of their supposed moral superiority as they enjoy reading about his crimes. In effect, Brady and Hindley are watching down on those who wrongly consider themselves better than the pair. If you can humour me here, I just want to sidetrack a little to discuss codes Brady may have used with respect to the Solstice Line system and Keith Bennett, in particular in his book The Gates of Janus. If correct, there is relevance to where he buried Keith Bennett. As we know, Brady loved to use codes, hidden meanings and riddles. Sometimes this was to hide information from the authorities, such as when corresponding with Hindley before they ceased contact with each other in the early 1970s, and other times it was to gain pleasure from getting one over people, as they would not understand or even know he was giving hints, clues and double meanings that alluded to his crimes. Brady and Hindley also did this during their pre-arrest relationship for years in the 1960s, so it was deeply ingrained in him. When reading The Gates of Janus, it struck me that Brady used a lot of words with X and V in them. He had quite a floral, pseudo-intellectual turn of phrase, so maybe this was just his way of getting lots of fancy words in. Another possibility is that he used a Roman numeral cipher in some passages he wrote. Looking at the table, numbers can be derived from Roman letters used in the English words he has written. I wonder whether he used such a Roman numeral cipher in various places in the text of his book. It is not dissimilar to the Braille letter substitution system he used in prison in the books he transcribed. He may have also done this with DCS topping in the 1980s, giving coded messages in what he said on occasion to baffle him. Looking at how this cipher might work, in the first section of The Gates of Janus, where Brady discusses serial killing in general rather than other specific serial killers, he uses the word code 4 times. I wonder if he does so to flag there is a code in the words of that sentence. Some of the sentences and paragraphs he writes come across as a bit clunky, as if he had been forced to construct them in a certain way to fit a code in. This could be one such example. He experiences the exhilarating superiority of the freelance predator, each act not only affirming his unfettered existence to the world, but also the failure to succeed by extant codes and rules of society. Knowing his strengths and limitations, he is determined to prove himself a villain, that being the only natural sphere in which he can shine. In this paragraph, as well as the code reference that I'll deconstruct shortly, he adds, determined to prove himself a villain. This is actually taken from a line, I am determined to prove a villain, in Shakespeare's Richard III. This was one of Brady's favourite pieces of literature, and it has, I believe, great and sinister relevance to the Moor's murders. I'm sure it was no accident that Brady hid this quote about murderous Richard III at this particular point. The word shine stands out as well, given that Keith was murdered in the Shiny Brook area. I might be pushing it too far now, but Brady's use of natural sphere makes me wonder if this is a reference to the hill that Greystone stands on that overlooks Shiny Brook. That hill, to all intents and purposes, is and looks like a natural sphere. In this whole clunky section, the phrase "succeed by extant codes and rules of society" sticks out, given its meaning and the use of the word code. If I apply a Roman numeral cipher to it, extant codes gives us 610, and rules of society corresponds to 651. Succeed could equate to SE, the grid letters used at the start of an Ordnance Survey grid reference. Add an initial 0 to the numbers to give a grid reference makes it SE 06100651. Plotting that grid reference, it just so happens to be in the whole of Great Britain, the exact spot that is the lay-by at Hoe Grain, where Brady and Hindley parked when they led Keith Bennett onto the moor. A coincidence? Maybe, but not too much of a stretch that it might be Brady playing games. It's not just that there may be a code in that paragraph, but it is relevant to the actual meaning of the words as well. Translating, he is going to succeed from being at that lay-by, then he will prove himself a villain on the hill at Shiny Brook. DCS Topping had a strange cryptic conversation with Brady in 1987, just prior to their first visit to the moor together. This seemed to baffle Topping, who could not grasp what Brady was getting at. As ever, and as Brady says in the Gates of Janus, this is how he operates. He is talking obliquely, and I believe dropping hints and clues. If we take each in turn, he said I would understand the conversation if I listened to the various tones. It is not much of a stretch to say that various tones is a play on words and turns into various stones. Various tones, various stones, i.e. the various stones that are important, meaning grey stones perhaps? He asked me if we were talking about 7 or 8 days. He asked what police custody meant. And again, he wanted to clarify 2 things, the question of 7 or 8 days and the definition of police custody. And again, then he asked what police custody meant. I believe this could be another Roman numeral substitution cipher to come up with a grid reference, used in the same way as he did in the Gates of Janus for the Hoe Grain lay-by, but more specific to greystones this time. Brady asked DCS Topping the meaning or definition of police custody 3 times. It could be he wanted clarification of what it meant for him to be under the control of the police rather than the prison service while on the visit to Saddleworth Moor. Or it could be, bearing in mind the other strange questions that perplexed DCS Topping during this conversation, Brady thought he was being clever, dangling the grid reference of Keith Bennett's grave in front of the detective chief superintendent. Using the Roman numeral substitution cipher, police custody gives us the number 751. Brady also asked about the numbers 7 or 8. DCS Topping took this to be a reference to the so-called Human Week that Brady asked for in return for information about where he had buried Pauline and Keith. Brady twice asked about the numbers 7 or 8 at the same time as the meaning of police custody that using the cipher is 751. Looking at an Ordnance Survey map that covers gravestones, these numbers very much pinpoint it using the grid reference system. When Brady repeatedly asked DCS Topping what police custody meant, he was effectively giving the northing, i.e. the vertical number of the grid reference for gravestones, 751. The 7 or 8 could be a reference to the single-digit northing grid square number. The various stones at this grid reference only point to one place on the map, gravestones. Far-fetched? Maybe. But DCS Topping was also open to the possibility of coded Ordnance Survey map grid references. In his book, he noted that the grid reference for the part of Saddleworth Moor they were looking at contained the number 666, and, as he said, this is supposedly the devil's number. He bore this information in mind when he organised a search of a church graveyard for Brady's victims. I'll now briefly run through each of the murders in turn with respect to how they fit in with the Solstice Line system that can be considered as the template behind them all. Brady admitted he needed an increase in the aesthetics and symbolism of each murder in order to keep gaining satisfaction from them. This is apparent as these factors escalate each time. With Pauline Reed, the first child they murdered, they were limited to when Hindley had use of a van that finally occurred in July 1963, even though she had not passed her driving test at that point. Effectively, the murder was a dry run to gain experience. Brady wrote about how he had planned the exact burial site well in advance. Hindley said that Brady had complained about the logistical difficulties in moving Pauline's body, and this was why he suggested a younger child next time. This makes it sound like Brady carried Pauline and that he did not bury her exactly where she was murdered. Once over the rocks of Hollinbrown Knoll, they would be out of sight of the road, and the terrain has large peaty areas not widely separated for digging. So it really only makes sense that having murdered her, Brady carried Pauline because he wanted to bury her at a very specific location, such as on the Solstice Line. Lastly, Brady said the murder would be an existential exercise of sheer willpower, a sacrifice. The next child they murdered, John Kilbride, was buried on a direct line with gravestones at one end and Pauline Reed in between. Brady was pleased with the increased aesthetics of the burial site, including its view over the reservoirs, and repeatedly revisited the area to be by the grave to gain inner calm. From the trial evidence in 1966, we know that Hindley hired a car on the winter solstice, 21st December 1963, to visit John Kilbride's grave. Brady toasted John at his graveside at midnight on New Year's Eve 1963, that is a significant pagan time and day. Keith Bennett was murdered 5 days prior to the summer solstice in June 1964. I believe most probably so Brady could visit his grave then. Keith's burial location that I propose was at Greystones, anchored the Solstice Line. Brady needed to increase the symbolism with each murder to gain the same satisfaction. Keith's burial site was surely chosen as it honoured the Stonehenge pagan symbolism. Leslie Ann Downey was murdered on Boxing Day 1964 during the Yule pagan festival. It was as close to the winter solstice as practical for them that time of year, when the house was empty as Hindley's grandmother was out for the day. Brady admitted that her burial site was pre-planned. Also, there were at least 2 photographs that Brady took many months before he murdered her that reference her burial site. This demonstrates that she was not buried just for expediency reasons closest to the road as her body was carried there, but that the site had long-term planning behind it, likely to ensure that it lay on the Solstice Line. Brady took anti-religious pagan photographs of Leslie Ann Downey in praying, kneeling and crucifixion poses, so yet again there was an increase in symbolism. By Brady's own admission, as discussed, Edward Evans was murdered out of sync too early in October 1965, as he was not due one for another 3 months. I believe Brady also said the murder won't count as it did not fit his solstitial timing system. We'll now look at Greystones in more detail. There is a stone circle at Greystones shown in my photograph on the left that is very similar in appearance to the one on the right that was taken at Ramshaw Rocks near Leek that is in Brady's tartan album. I wonder if Brady put it in the tartan album to act as a surrogate grave marker photograph. The layout of the stone circle, the aspect of the slope and the outline of the hill in the distance are all similar. Brady may have included it to remind himself of Keith's grave, but without it being a geographically correct pointer for the police. Greystones also has an isolated rock shown on the left, a similar bearing from the main stones as the heel and slaughter stones of Stonehenge. The heel stone of Stonehenge is the significant rock the sun rises behind, in line with the centre of the main monument at the summer solstice. The slaughter stone at Stonehenge, shown in the photograph on the right, is not actually thought to have been used for sacrifices. It is probably just a coincidence, but Duncan Staff writes in The Lost Boy that Hindley said that Keith Bennett went with Brady like a lamb to the slaughter. Brady knew exactly where he was going. He had chosen the spot carefully and hidden a spade there. Brady told Alan Keatley that he buried Keith with a large rock or boulder as the headstone. This could be one of the Greystones rocks. Brady also recounted a story of a hiker he shot with Hindley in Scotland, of which the police have no record. Brady said he buried the body near a rock pinnacle. He could have been alluding to Keith Bennett's burial with this story, as he liked to talk in such terms. I have analysed in detail Brady and Hindley's accounts they gave to DCS Topping, Alan Keatley and Duncan Staff that are written up in their books of what they did between parking at the Hoe Grain lay-by to returning to the car on the night they murdered and buried Keith Bennett. This is probably a period of 2 to 3 hours, and defining exactly what happened and where during this relatively short space of time is at the heart of the matter. Cross-referencing and teasing it all out, the evidence points to the Shiny Brook area being the place relevant to Keith Bennett's murder, and Hindley's account of how she was a lookout on the plateau overlooking Hoe Grain and Shiny Brook is likely false in the way she described it. The descriptions Brady and Hindley have given over the years of that evening point to a particular timeline that leads to Keith being buried at Greystones. To try and keep this as concise as possible, I shan't detail my analysis of the various accounts here, and from this, how I came to my conclusions about Keith's murder and burial sites, but plan to put it out on another video. One thing I will say to lend weight to all this is that in having analysed all the accounts, I concluded that Keith was most likely killed at the junction of the Nearmost Grain and Shiny Brook valleys, this being the gully that is talked about by Brady and Hindley. I then went back to the moor for another visit to try and piece it all together on the ground. I took with me screenshots of some of the photographs that Brady had taken of the Shiny Brook area. These photographs were, and I assume must still be, in police possession and can be very briefly seen on screen in the 2004 BBC documentary Dark History: The Moors Murder Code. With much use of pause and rewind, I managed to get good enough images of 3 of these photographs of Brady's. I've not seen these photographs outside of these snatched glimpses in the documentary, so they must not be in the public domain. When on location, I managed to marry up 2 of the 3 photographs to specific spots, satisfied that I had the right place. One was on Shiny Brook stream itself, with the photograph on screen being my modern day version of it, with Greystones to the right in the picture, out of shot of course, as would be the case with cautious Brady, not wanting it to be easily identifiable. I have not put the screenshot of Brady's original up here for copyright reasons. The other photograph of Brady's was exactly the spot where the evidence points to Keith being murdered, the junction of Nearmost Grain and Shiny Brook. The photograph shown now is the one I took that precisely corresponds to Brady's. Of course, it could all be a massive coincidence, but to have a theory based on a detailed analysis of the evidence from the books as to the location where Brady and Hindley murdered Keith, and then after this to find that Brady has photographed this exact spot in one of his vague, nondescript moorland shots, was quite startling to say the least. Assuming Brady killed Keith Bennett at Shiny Brook, I want to consider the feasibility of him carrying Keith's body up to gravestones. Even before they had started killing, Brady had practiced carrying Hindley on the moors in preparation for carrying the children's bodies. We know that Brady carried the body of the next child he murdered, Leslie Ann Downey, from the road up to where he buried her on Hollinbrow Knoll. Comparing the elevation profile for this, that is the top image, against Shiny Brook to gravestones, that is the image below, and that I propose Brady did with Keith, it can be seen they are very similar gradients. Admittedly, Shiny Brook to gravestones is further, 196 metres versus 70 metres for Leslie Ann Downey, but it is certainly still doable. The longer carry would no doubt have been more tiring for Brady. This could help explain why he didn't take the spade he used to bury Keith back up Hoe Grain to the car, but disposed of it before that. This is the only murder that Brady and Hindley actually agree on the outcome of the spade used to bury a child. Also, given the longer walk from the car and the carry of Keith up to gravestones that would all have taken more time, it could explain why, according to Brady, it was very dark on the walk back up to the car, causing them to lose their bearings, reaching the road further to the east than they were aiming for. Another thing that is interesting about this is that according to DCS Topping, during the first visit to the area with Brady in 1987, Brady took him a very steep, difficult route up to gravestones from the Weir. This was rather than the much more gradual ascent that starts close to the Nearmost Grain Shiny Brook junction. I do wonder if this was all part of Brady's attempt to misdirect DCS Topping that he later admitted to Alan Keatley doing that day. Effectively, Brady took him a route that it would be nigh on impossible to carry a body up if he went that way, rather than the much more straightforward ascent that he actually would have taken. Brady and Hindley enjoyed putting unwitting others in situations related to the murders without the other people knowing this. Examples include neighbourhood child Patricia Hodges and Hindley's sister and her husband Maureen and David Smith were taken to visit and picnic on the graves of the murdered children. Brady advised Patricia Hodges to drink water from the stream where John Kilbride was buried, as it's clean. Patricia Hodges was encouraged by Hindley to read a newspaper article out loud concerning Leslie Ann Downey's disappearance that occurred 5 days prior, while tape recording it for her and Brady's later pleasure. On another occasion, Hindley suggested that Patricia, who was visiting with her mother, should go upstairs to play Gene Pitney's 24 Hours from Tulsa, the record that commemorated the killing of John Kilbride. Brady repeatedly asked after his boss's child at work, who was also called Leslie Ann, days after he had killed Leslie Ann Downey. No doubt he gained a perverse kick from this. If we now move on from these situations to a similar one that I believe involved a visit to Keith Bennett's grave, Brady and Hindley took neighbourhood children Carol and David Waterhouse for a trip to Shiny Brook on the 30th of August 1965. They drove there and walked onto the moor the same as they had done with Keith. Brady replicated this by specifically walking with David just as he did with Keith, while Hindley walked with Carol. According to police statements the Waterhouse children gave in 1965, they picnicked at gravestones. In the 2013 ITV documentary Brady and Hindley, Possession, when interviewed by Duncan's staff, Carol Waterhouse said that she could remember some posing. This is important as Brady was likely lining up Carol and David in particular ways so their positions had relevance to Keith's burial site, as he did, with many other photographs for the other graves, as I shall detail later. 2 weeks later, Brady and Hindley gave the Waterhouse children and their mother a slideshow of these photographs, likely to gain satisfaction from knowing that they are showing the children's mother that they took them on a day out and sat by the grave of a similar aged boy they had murdered. Brady, for several years while in prison, was desperate to get these specific slides back into his possession. He was successful in this in 1972. A side point on this is the relevance of picnics to Brady. I don't think it was just a coincidence he liked to take unsuspecting others on picnics to the grave sites. Brady had a life-changing revelation as a child that he frequently talked about when his atavistic, pantheistic urges came to him during a family picnic at Loch Lomond in Scotland. We know that he liked to recreate events and scenes under the same conditions as they occurred, such as visiting grave sites at the same time of day as the murders and burials. Brady having a picnic while out in the countryside at the site of a grave where he had buried a child he had murdered would have rekindled those feelings from the childhood trip to have a picnic that he recounted so often as central to his beliefs and character. He even showed DCS Topping photographs of the Loch Lomond area and told him the photographs were significant, but of course he would not say why. During the Topping investigation in the mid-1980s, Hindley told him she did not think they picnicked with the Waterhouse children at gravestones, without saying where they actually did picnic on that day if it was not there. Hindley also told DCS Topping that the photographs Brady took of Carol and David on that day were not significant. He took pictures all the time, she said. At this time, however, she was still maintaining with DCS Topping that Brady did not use markers to locate the graves. Years later, however, she admitted to her therapist Joe Chapman that some of the photographs that they had taken on the moors were constructed with the location of the graves taken into consideration. Therefore, she was lying to DCS Topping at this stage in the mid-1980s about photographs not marking graves, so the pictures of the Waterhouse children could well be significant. On his first visit back to Saddleworth with DCS Topping, Brady took him to gravestones and the view over the reservoirs from there. In this area, Brady was quiet, and for the first time that day he acted lost and confused, I am sure to try to play down its significance. Brady doubled down on this later when talking with DCS Topping about the visit, saying that Eagle's Head, Greystones and the reservoir views were not significant, undoubtedly as this was the opposite of the case. Brady and Hindley both said in their accounts years later that they had taken more than one trip with Carol and David Waterhouse, whereas the children said in their statements to the police in 1965 that they only ever went out once together on that bank holiday Monday. Brady and Hindley were likely trying to downplay the significance of that one trip by saying they went out together multiple times. Carol and David had no reason to lie about the number of trips, whereas Brady and Hindley very much did. Both Brady and Hindley's responses to DCS Topping about the area, the picnic and the photographs, together with the slideshow with the children and their mother, and Brady's keenness for years to have the slides with him in prison, only reiterate the likely importance of gravestones and these photographs. I have to thank our dog Maisie for helping solve the next piece of the puzzle. As you can see, she's quite active and likes a decent walk, preferably with a swim included and some ball fetching for good measure. I'd spent the morning writing up my notes on the Waterhouse children, but Maisie sat looking at me with her pleading eyes as if to say, "Isn't it time we went out for a walk?" I agree with her, but before getting up from the desk, I jotted a note as a reminder as to what I was writing about for when we got back from the walk. Without even thinking about it, I wrote down the letters WH to remind myself to continue with the Waterhouse children section. It then struck me that this is what the WH in the disposal plan that Brady drew up for Edward Evans stands for: Waterhouse, not Woodhead or Wessenden Head that the police thought might be the case. That never really made sense because of where it is written in the plan. We know that the word picnic was also in the disposal plan, as Brady was questioned about it during the trial, giving a suitably vague answer that was no doubt a lie, that it meant having a picnic at some caves. WH is at the end of the wreck or reconnaissance section after periodically checking that the grave was undisturbed. Having the place of burial listed as the end point makes no sense, but having a picnic with the Waterhouse children as the finish of that murder cycle does. Checking on the graves post-murders was part of Brady's MO. He admitted doing this for the graves of Pauline Reed, John Kilbride and Leslie Ann Downey. It makes sense he would include this in the plan for Edward Evans and, of most importance, that he had done so for Keith Bennett's grave as well. There were only 5 weeks between the day out with the Waterhouse children on the 30th of August 1965 and Edward Evans' murder on the 6th of October. That Bank Holiday Monday trip out, which was a success with the picnic and photographs taken, was surely at Keith Bennett's grave, and it would have been fresh in Brady's mind when drawing up this next disposal plan for Edward Evans just 5 weeks later, so he included it again here. One last thing I would like to add about the plan is that there are only 2 instances in it of letter abbreviations being used for words, PB and WH. These are the only 2 items in the plan. If they had been written out in full, they would have directly linked Brady and Hindley to murders. The other words in the plan were not direct evidence. David Smith has his name written out as Dave 3 times in the plan. Brady incorrectly thought he had groomed David sufficiently to be his willing accomplice, so there was no need to abbreviate his name to D or similar. PB refers to Hindley's prayer book, where they hid the train station left luggage ticket for the 2 suitcases that, amongst other items, contained the hugely incriminating photographs and tape recording of Leslie Ann Downey's torture. If Brady had not abbreviated Waterhouse to WH, the police would have quickly realised that the neighbouring Waterhouse children must be significant. The children would have told the police of the picnic at Greystones, as they did in their police statements later, but the significance of this was not realised at the time. With the word picnic also in the plan, the police would have undoubtedly concluded that the picnic at Greystones was significant, fully searched the area and found Keith Bennett's body. Wessenden Head is a large non-specific area. If WH meant this, it would not lead the police directly to any bodies or connect Brady and Hindley to the crimes. In contrast, the words prayer book and Waterhouse needed hiding by the use of PB and WH. I now want to consider the so-called grave marker photographs that Brady took. I'm slightly hampered here, as I think I can't show them all due to copyright reasons, but I've taken photographs in the same areas to demonstrate the points I'm trying to make. Many of the photographs have been frequently published in books and online, so if you've read about the Moors murders, then hopefully you'll know the pictures I'm talking about. The reason to discuss the images is, I don't think how Brady staged them and their relevance to the burial sites has been fully appreciated. Their full interpretation is important, however, with regard to both the Solstice Line system and trying to locate the exact spot where Keith Bennett was buried. Of course, not every photograph that Brady took of Hindley or of countryside views are of relevance to the Moors murders. He appreciated the necessity of having a prepared alibi and taking decoy pictures and mixing them up, for example in his tartan album, so the grave marker photographs did not look too obvious if they got into the hands of the police. There are 4 key factors to consider in each of Brady's photographs. Firstly, the grave or graves may be directly visible, such as the photo of Hindley crouching over John Kilbride's grave holding her dog Puppet. Next, they may be in the direction of the gaze of the apparent photographic subject. I have a couple of examples of this. Again, in the photograph of Hindley crouching over John Kilbride's grave, she is staring down directly at where they buried him. The second example is a lesser seen photograph of a grainy image of Hindley sitting at the top of the waterfall on Shiny Brook that is seen here in a picture I took this year. She is not actually looking directly down to Shiny Brook, that is where I took the photograph from, but her gaze and body position are facing in the direction of the red arrow. She is looking and facing southwest on the bearing of the Solstice Line towards Holland Brown Knoll, that is 1.5 miles from here, just over the horizon, where 3 of the graves are. If you study Brady's photograph, it is obviously quite posed and her body position and gaze deliberate. It would be more natural for Hindley to face Brady down by the stream, who was on the same line as I was when I took the photo. Instead, she's looking across on the solstice bearing to the other graves. Again, not all the photographs have to reference all the graves. If my theory about Keith Bennett being buried at gravestones is correct, then this picture has no relevance to that. It could have been taken before they murdered Keith or had decided to use gravestones as a burial site. Or it is just a Solstice Line Holland Brown Knoll reference picture. In the same way, the gas marker photo of Hindley does not reference John Kilbride, despite being in the vicinity. It is of more relevance to the Solstice Line and Pauline Reed and, as we will see, Leslie Ann Downey's burial site several months in the future, demonstrating the level of planning that Brady undertook. Thirdly, the graves may be in the same line that the body position of the subject is facing, such as the gas marker photograph seen here, where Hindley is standing on the rocks of Holland Brown Knoll holding Puppet close to her wrapped in a blanket, with her body obscuring a Trans-Pennine gas pipeline gas marker that is around 10 metres from the rocks on the plateau of Holland Brown Knoll. Here she faces out across the moors, with her body positioned facing towards where Pauline Reed was buried, although it could be argued she is more accurately facing along the Solstice Line bearing rather than towards Pauline Reed's grave. The 2 photographs of Hindley holding her dog, one crouching over John Kilbride's grave and this one up on the rocks of Holland Brown Knoll, facing out on the bearing of the Solstice Line towards where they buried Pauline Reed, were taken on the same day in February 1964. What is interesting is that if these 2 photographs are placed together, it can be seen that Hindley is effectively standing back to back with herself, looking out in both directions along the Solstice Line. Brady opens his book with this quote from the Collins English Dictionary: "Janus, the Roman god, has 2 heads facing opposite ways." This is exactly how these 2 pictures of Hindley, taken on the same day in 1964, were staged, looking opposite ways along the Solstice Line, towards John Kilbride in one direction and Pauline Reed in the other. Given this duality of Janus looking both forwards and backwards, he is linked to the sun and the moon, and from this, light and dark. The title of Brady's much talked of but as yet unpublished or fully seen autobiography, Black Light, now also makes sense. Finally, the graves may be on the same bearing as a line from the photographer through the subject. There are multiple examples of this. If we consider the photograph of Hindley crouching over John Kilbride's grave, that is roughly where I have taken this one, Brady has positioned himself and Hindley with the grave in between them, so Holland Brown Knoll is in the distance. There is a horseshoe gap between the 2 sets of Holland Brown Knoll rocks that Brady often referred to that is a geographical marker he must have used to line up his photographs in this area. When on site, it is actually much easier to see the rocks and the horseshoe gap than might be imagined from Brady's photograph. The precise location was only identified using the skill of scenes of crime officer Mike Mashida's photographic technique of redeveloping the negative to show Hollinbrow Knoll on the horizon. It stands to reason that Brady did not want to photograph the graves in such a way as to make them easily identifiable if the police ever got their hands on them. Extrapolating this, it may be unlikely there is a geographically obvious photograph of the next burial site, that of Keith Bennett, amongst those that Brady took. If Keith is buried at gravestones, Brady most likely would not have taken a picture of the grave with the shape of one or more of the characteristic rocks obvious so it could be placed. Going back to the line that Brady used to take the photograph, it goes from him through John Kilbride's grave, then Hindley, then up to Hollinbrow Knoll, where at that time only Pauline Reade was buried, all along the Solstice Line. The next series of photographs to consider as a grave is on the same bearing as a line from the photographer through the subject are those taken at Hollinbrow Knoll after Hindley part-exchanged her car in May 1964. Brady is looking directly towards the camera in the general direction of Pauline Reade's grave. Hindley, however, is facing to the left of the photo, that is east, and not towards either John Kilbride's or Pauline Reade's graves. The pertinent bearing must be the position of the person taking the photograph with respect to the other person on the rock. In both cases, the bearing line is in the direction of John Kilbride's grave, with them effectively obscuring the exact actual location, as can be seen in my photograph. Similar to the gas marker photograph, their bodies are blocking off a key point that would otherwise be in the image. Both these bearings are once again along the Solstice Line, northeast to southwest. Brady also photographed Hindley's new van on the road, looking like it is parked up in the same position as in the photographs of them standing on the rock. This is my photograph of the same area, although the bearing I took it on is not quite a perfect match, but it is close enough to illustrate this. The A635 runs between the parallel wooden post and wire fences. The photograph with the van is also taken at an angle to the road in the southwest to northeast Solstice Line direction. It may just be coincidental, or Brady took it with Pauline Reade's grave over the other side of the rocks in mind, but the alignment once again is consistent with the Solstice Line system, and Brady effectively documented this with his series of photographs on that day. The other interesting aspect is that in my photograph, the gas marker, that is a modern version of what was there in the 1960s and I assume is in the same position, can be clearly seen on the horizon on the left-hand side of the rocks. I took this photograph at a distance from the area where they buried John Kilbride, the other side of the road. Brady's photo of the van only captures the right-hand half of this rock cluster and misses out the gas marker. Given how Hindley obscured it in the photo of her standing on the rocks, in the picture taken 3 months previously, I wonder if this was deliberate again to make it hard for the police to discover where the photo was taken. When he was asked by the police where these exact photographs were taken, Brady told them Whaley Bridge. I now want to consider further how Brady used photographs in the planning of the burial sites. So let's look again at this picture of Hindley taken in February 1964, where she is obscuring the gas marker. I plotted her position MH on Google Earth as shown, together with the gas marker. If a bearing line is plotted from Hindley through the gas marker, it crosses the Solstice Line 13 metres from where Brady buried Leslie Ann Downey. Considering a modern GPS device's location accuracy of 5 to 10 metres, that is remarkable. Leslie Ann was buried just 8 metres off the bearing line that connects Hindley to the gas marker. So if Hindley set off from her position in the photograph, walked past the gas marker and kept going in a straight line, within 46 metres she would almost be next to Leslie Ann's grave. To give the distances some perspective, a tennis court is 24 metres long and 11 metres wide. Using the 1964 gas marker photograph together with the Solstice Line system, it is possible to walk to their intersection that is 13 metres, just over a tennis court's width from Leslie Ann Downey's grave. This is corroborated by the presentation that prosecution barrister William Mars Jones gave to the Medico-Legal Society in November 1967. In the meeting transcript, he stated there was a photograph of Hindley glancing at the spot which subsequently proved to be the grave of Leslie Ann Downey, but the picture was also taken in the early part of 1964, long before Leslie Ann Downey had disappeared. It sounds like William Mars Jones is describing a different photograph to the gas marker one, hence strengthening the case for pre-planning if there are two photographs referencing Leslie Ann's grave but taken several months before she was killed. In the gas marker picture, Hindley is not glancing at the spot but looking down at her dog on the bearing of the Solstice Line, with Leslie Ann's future grave 46 metres away from her and not in the direction she is looking. So, how might the Solstice Line system at Greystones be used to search for Keith Bennett's body? If we look at the area concerned, from Greystones, including its adjacent stone circle and up to the isolated rock, it is about 56 metres long and 27 metres wide. Going back to my tennis court comparison, that's the length and width of 2.5 tennis courts, so not a huge area to be searched. If I had to hedge my bets, I would say the place to start the search is inside the stone circle. Brady likened serial killing to declaring war on society. In wartime, the gates of the Roman Temple of Janus were opened and sacrifices held in its interior. The gates of Greystones are definitely open, and look out over the stone circle. It is all heavily laden with aesthetics and symbolism that were fundamental to Brady. The photograph of the Ramshaw Rock stone circle in the Tartan album lends weight to this. Brady twice told Alan Keatley that he used a rock or boulder as a headstone. At the centre of the stone circle there are rocks that could fit this description. Of course, the other areas to look at are the main gap between the Greystones rocks that lies on the Solstice Line and the isolated rock that is positioned like the Slaughter Stone at Stonehenge. As Brady was so keen on aesthetics and symbolism, I don't think he would have buried Keith just anywhere in this area around the Greystones site. I think he would have chosen the line through the rocks on the same bearing as he used for the other three graves at Hollinbrown Knoll, southwest to northeast, 242 and 62 degrees. This is roughly the line through Greystones, the stone circle, towards the isolated rock and over to the edge of the plateau towards Wessenden Head Reservoir. It feels more in keeping with John Kilbride's burial site for Keith's to be heading down the slope from Greystones to the reservoirs rather than southwest from Greystones towards the open moorland, but an open mind needs to be kept on this. Bearing all this in mind, a re-examination of the photographs that Brady took of the Waterhouse children's trip of the 30th of August 1965 and any others of the Greystones area will, in my opinion, narrow down a potential search area to an exact spot. Where any of the four key factors in one of Brady's photographs intersects with the Solstice Line, then X marks the spot. Just as he did with John Kilbride's grave that was the previous murder, it is likely Brady took several pictures that reference Keith's grave, both near and far, and, as per the opening quote he used in the Gates of Janus, looking in opposite ways, i.e. southwest and northeast. As mentioned previously, Brady posed Carol and David Waterhouse for some of the photographs at least. It is more than likely that with such posing, Brady got the children to stand with their bodies facing a particular way and made them look in a particular direction. Of course, I would love to see these pictures myself, to be able to interpret them using the methods I've described. I do not think it would take long after studying these photographs, then a trip on location with them, to narrow down where Brady buried Keith to an exact spot. It is all too easy to overlook the complete significance of the pictures and just think one aspect of them is why they were taken. Brady took the photographs to give himself morbid gratification, as even if the graves were not directly shown as the foreground subject, he could use the Solstice Line system together with the directional factors I have discussed to picture the graves in the distance and in his mind. In doing so, however, he left the photographs as inadvertent clues. Once his hidden agenda Solstice Line system is discovered, that I believe I have now done, it is possible to accurately narrow down the grave sites using the images. I assume the police still have copies of the crucial photographs that Brady took of the picnic with the Waterhouse children, and so the pictures can be re-examined. These were the ones Brady showed in the slideshow to Carol and David Waterhouse and their mother in the morbid gratification way of his, the same ones that for several years in prison he persisted in trying to obtain from Hindley's mother, who had them for safekeeping. Nellie Hindley only relented in 1972 and gave the slides to Brady then, once Hindley had broken off contact with him. To reiterate the importance of the photographs and the direction they were taken in, or the direction of body position or gaze, I have put all those Brady took in the Holland-Brown Knoll area on a map. This shows Brady's consistency in referencing the graves and the Solstice Line. The only photograph that references graves both near and far is the one of Hindley crouching over John Kilbride's burial site, although it could be, rather than referencing the distant grave of Pauline Reed, the other side of the Holland-Brown Knoll rocks on the horizon, the far view is included to ensure the bearing of the photograph is along the Solstice Line, towards gravestones 2 miles away. The other photographs generally only include one grave in the direction they were taken in, but they are taken on the Solstice Line. If the Solstice Line did not exist and Brady was just taking a picture of Hindley with a grave in mind, then you might expect a photograph to be at a random angle across it. The points of reference of all these, however, are on the southwest to northeast axis. With his mathematical mind planning the burial sites for months, with mental grid references made from landmarks on the horizon, this all seems very precise. Brady had 25 years of correspondence with Alan Keatley, with repeated reference to primeval atavism, wild places and rocks pantheism, paganism, symbolism and aesthetics as detailed in his biography, much of it in Brady's own words. The murders and burial sites were obviously not random, and neither were many of the photographs. They combine to demonstrate Brady's hidden agenda that is actually a very precise system. I do not think, having walked Keith down Hoe Grain and having turned either left or right at the junction with Shiny Brook, Brady just murdered him in a peat gully along there and buried him at the same spot. We know the burial site was pre-planned. Brady wanted to increase the symbolism. The evidence of the Waterhouse children's trip and the Gates of Janus points to gravestones being the burial place. In the unlikely event of the photographs not being available, the next option would be to show Carol and David Waterhouse, if they are still around and amenable to this, current photographs of gravestones, its stone circle and isolated rock, to see if they have any recall of having the picnic at a specific spot here. Having gathered as much information as possible from Brady's photographs and or directly from Carol and David, then any areas highlighted could be searched for Keith Bennett's remains at that site. This is where I hope someone with the authority and skills to undertake a systematic search of the areas identified from cross-referencing and intersecting the photos and the Solstice Line will see this video and be able to undertake such a search. Of course, I do not want to encourage anyone without such authority to attempt any search. It is private land and an amateur search could be damaging, so any search must be undertaken with meticulous care and respect. The reason for this video is not to spark up amateur digging, but to A, create debate as to whether, having seen this, other people agree or disagree with my theory and can produce further evidence either way, and to B, stimulate authorities or legitimate parties to investigate this. From my limited understanding, geophysical search techniques could include LiDAR to look for ground disturbance with level changes and ground penetrating radar to see what lies beneath, and these can either be by direct contact on the ground or via drone. What might help is the area appears relatively dry with no large watercourses running through it, so migration of peat down the hillside over the years might be less of an issue here compared to other parts of Shiny Brook. It is obviously quite a stony and rocky area, but it seems that ground penetrating radar can adjust for this, and I would hope the ground between the large stones, which is likely where Brady would have buried Keith, could be accurately examined. Even without the photographs, and if, quite understandably, Carol and David cannot recall where they picnicked 6 decades ago, even with the aid of photographic reminders, then, with the knowledge of the Solstice Line system and how it links with gravestones, a search could still be undertaken. It would be more precise with the secondary photographic or Waterhouse information, but even without this, it is still quite a focused area. I have much other confirmatory evidence that I have already written up in a 200-page fully referenced document. It may be hard to believe, but I've had to edit most of it out, as otherwise this video will be even longer than it already is. I may put out future videos to give some more depth to all this depending on how this one goes. If this video only gets 2 views, one being me, the other Maisie, then I may have to reconsider. Just to give a small taste of this, if you consider the Solstice Line system when reading about the Moors murders, you will frequently see hidden oblique references to it, underpinning the methodology of what occurred. For example, Alan Keatley wrote of when Brady started planting the seeds of forming a murderous partnership with Hindley, with their discussions taking place in the Wagon and Horses pub in Gorton. As they talked of becoming murderers, the setting sun lined up with a nearby church steeple through the window of the room where they sat and reflected off their drinks glasses. It surely isn't a coincidence that Brady gave this passage to Alan Keatley. It effectively describes them beginning as murderers, with the centrepiece being the bearing of the setting sun that he would soon use to position their victims' bodies. In addition, there is the symbolism of the church in shadow, given his anti-religious stance and what was about to occur, and he likened the room that he and Hindley were sitting in to a confessional. Not direct evidence of the Solstice Line system, but there are many, many other examples of Brady coming up with similar. With his extreme narcissistic personality disorder, everything he said like this was for a reason. I want to finish by summarising just the absolutely fundamental key points that have led me to believe that Keith is buried at gravestones. We know that Brady likened the rocks at gravestones to Stonehenge. He led DCS topping there on the first visit to the moors. He tried to downplay its significance with DCS topping, as did Hindley, who to gain parole had to distance herself both physically and psychologically from the murders and the grave discoveries. Brady called his book on serial killing The Gates of Janus, as Janus was the Roman god of the solstices. Brady admitted to symbolic allusion in the title. I believe this was a hidden reference to the solstices and the gates of gravestones. The solstices were central to the Moors murders' timing and burial locations. They define the sun's axis at Stonehenge, and Brady adopted this on Wessendon and Saddleworth Moors as his hidden agenda, his perfect murder system. Brady and Hindley took neighbourhood children Carol and David Waterhouse for a day out to Shiny Brook on the 30th of August 1965. They picnicked at gravestones. This was their modus operandi. They gained morbid gratification from picnicking at the grave sites of their murder victims with unsuspecting others. Brady took photographs of the day in which he posed the children. Brady's photographs often reference the graves in a hidden way, such as using the line of the person's position, stance, or gaze as a trigonometric marker to show the position of the grave. Brady and Hindley hosted a slideshow of these pictures for the children and their mother. They enjoyed putting unwitting others in situations related to the murders. Brady tried for years to gain possession of these particular slides when in prison, reinforcing their importance. Prior to murdering Edward Evans, which was 5 weeks after the picnic with the Waterhouse children, Brady drew up a disposal plan for Edward. This contained the word picnic and also, after checking on the grave periodically, the letters WH as the end of the post-murder recce. I believe this means that after they had periodically checked on the burial site and that it was secure, Brady and Hindley would have a picnic there with Carol and David Waterhouse, WH. So I believe the evidence points to Brady using a system based on the summer and winter solstices to plan the murder and burial timings and locations. The children were buried on a southwest to northeast line, with John Kilbride at one end and gravestones at the other. The evidence points to Keith Bennett being murdered at the Nearmost Grain Shiny Brook junction that Brady has also photographed, and he was then carried to be symbolically buried at nearby gravestones. To distill all this down into a flowchart action plan to locate Keith Bennett, firstly, re-examine the photographs taken by Brady of the Waterhouse children's trip and any other photographs that he took of the gravestones area, looking for any intersection with the Solstice Line. Keep in mind that the intersection, and hence Keith's grave, may be directly visible in the direction of the gaze of the apparent photographic subject, in the same line that the body position of the subject is facing, on the same bearing as a line from the photographer through the subject. If possible, also show Carol and David Waterhouse current photographs of gravestones and the surrounding rocks and area to see if they have any recall of having the picnic at a specific spot there. If it's not possible to do these steps, the next action is to just identify the solstice line bearing of 242 and 62 degrees on the ground at gravestones. Then mark out a narrow band of land along the solstice line, through the gates of gravestones, its stone circle and the isolated rock to the view over Wessendon Head Reservoir. Having gathered as much of the above information from all of this as possible, use geophysical techniques such as LiDAR and ground-penetrating radar to investigate any areas identified to search for Keith Bennett's remains at the specific site. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it and that it has given you something to think about. I also really hope that someone who has the authority, skills and resources to conduct a proper search for Keith in the area I've defined will see it and be able to act on it.